The four Gospels cannot agree on how many angels were at the empty tomb. One account says 1, another says 2. The women arrive at dawn in one of them, while it is still dark in another. For a lot of people, that is the loose thread, the one you are not supposed to pull, because once you do, the whole garment starts to come apart in your hands. But here's what almost no one tells you. If those four accounts matched perfectly, word for word, detail for detail, identical down to the hour and the names, that would be the more suspicious result, not the less. Sit with that for a moment, because it runs against everything you have been trained to assume. And by the end of this, the differences you were taught to fear may turn out to be the very thing that makes these accounts believable. When most people first notice the differences, they reach for one question. Which one is wrong? Matthew or John? One angel or two? And that question feels natural. It feels honest. But it is the wrong question, and asking it badly is exactly what traps people on both sides of this argument. Because notice what that question already assumes. It assumes that any difference must mean a defect. That two accounts of the same morning have to line up like two photocopies, or one of them is lying. That is not a rule the Gospels ever agreed to. It is a rule we imported, and then blamed them for breaking. So before we go 1 inch further, let us be honest about the two ways people usually handle this, and let us refuse both of them. The first is the dishonest defender, the one who waves a hand and says the differences are not really there, or that they all dissolve if you just believe hard enough, or worst of all, that you should not be looking this closely in the first place. That is not faith. That is fear wearing the costume of faith. If your trust in a text depends on never reading it carefully, that is not trust. It is avoidance. The second is the dishonest attacker, the one who treats every variation as a fatal blow. Different number of women at the tomb. Contradiction. The whole thing collapses. This reading holds the Gospels to a standard that no ancient document, and frankly no honest set of human witnesses, has ever met or could ever meet. We are going to do something different. We are going to put the hardest cases on the table, not the easy ones. The resurrection morning that will not synchronize. Two family trees for Jesus that do not match. A crucifixion that one Gospel seems to date a full day off from the other three. We will look straight at them. And the question we will ask is not which one is wrong. The question is, what kind of difference is this? Here is the quiet mistake almost everyone makes. You have been reading the Gospels as if they were 4 security camera transcripts of the same event. 4 feeds, 4 timestamps, and your job is to check whether the timestamps match. When they do not, the footage must be corrupted. But the Gospels were never that. They were not written to be that. They belong to a kind of writing the ancient world knew well, and we have almost entirely forgotten. A genre. In Greek, the word is bios, a life, an ancient biography. And ancient biography did not work the way a modern police report works. It had its own rules for how you told a true story about a real person. An ancient biographer was allowed to compress 3 days into one scene, to move an event from one part of the story to another so its meaning landed harder, to paraphrase a saying rather than transcribe it, to shine a spotlight on one figure in a crowd and leave the others in shadow. None of that counted as lying. All of it counted as skilled writing inside the conventions everyone understood. That single fact changes the entire conversation. Because if the genre itself expected this kind of variation, then a difference between two Gospels is not automatically a crack. It might be a brushstroke. So here's the spine of everything that follows. The differences are real. We are not going to pretend them away. But whether a given difference is an error or exactly what it should be, is decided almost entirely by how you read it. Read it as a corrupted transcript, and it looks like failure. Read it as what it actually is. And the same detail can look like honesty. Same words on the page. 2 completely different verdicts. And the verdict was never in the text. It was in your hands, the whole time. Start where the pressure is highest. The empty tomb. Picture 4 people who loved the same man, and who watched him die in public, slowly, the way the Romans designed it to happen. Now picture each of them, years later, trying to tell you about the morning everything changed. The worst weekend of their lives, ending in the one thing none of them expected. Ask any 4 people who shared a moment like that to tell you about it, and you already know what happens. The core holds. The edges move. And that is exactly what you find. Walk through it slowly. In Matthew, Two women come as the first light breaks, and there is one angel. In Mark, another woman, Salome, is named in the group. The sun has come up, and there is a young man in white inside the tomb. In Luke, the group grows again. Joanna is added. It is early dawn, and now there are two men in dazzling clothes. And in John, the camera narrows to one woman alone, Mary Magdalene, arriving while it is still dark, and later, two angels. Different women, a different count of messengers, a different quality of light. If you were grading a photocopy, you would circle every one of these in red. But now hear what does not move. The tomb is empty. It is the first day of the week. Women are the first to find it, in a culture that did not treat a woman's testimony as worth much, which is the last detail you would invent if you were making the story up to sound credible. And in every single account, the message is the same. He is not here. The center is granite. The edges are alive. That is not what fabrication looks like. That is what memory looks like. Now let me show you the one that genuinely surprises people in church, because it is read aloud every Christmas and almost never read side by side. Two genealogies. Matthew opens his gospel by tracing Jesus back through King David's son Solomon down to a man named Jacob, the father of Joseph. Luke traces the same line, but he runs it through a different son of David entirely, through Nathan. And when he arrives at Joseph, he names the father as Heli, not Jacob, Heli. Between David and Joseph, the two lists barely share a name. Two family trees, for one man, that do not match. And here is the part worth being honest about. The most common attempt to reconcile them, the idea that one list is really Mary's line, or that a legal adoption stitches the two together, has been rejected as forced not only by skeptics, but by some genuinely conservative scholars who hold a very high view of Scripture. They looked at it and said, this harmonization is too artificial to be what the text means. So what are these lists doing, if not archival biology? A careful reading, the kind associated with one of the most respected Catholic scholars of the last century, lands here. They were never meant to be a hospital record of who fathered whom. They are theological portraits. Matthew is shouting one thing across his whole genealogy. Son of David, son of Abraham, king and covenant. Luke runs the line all the way back past Abraham to Adam, to God himself, and shouts something else. Son of God, brother of every human being who ever lived. They are not two failed attempts at the same chart. They are two true claims, drawn in the language of lineage. Now, we have to be careful here, because this is the moment where a dishonest video would speed up, and a dishonest viewer would relax. I am going to do the opposite. I am going to slow down and show you the hardest one. The one I cannot tie off with a bow. It is the timing of the crucifixion relative to the Passover. Matthew, Mark, and Luke describe the Last Supper as the Passover meal itself, the bread and the cup, eaten on the night that begins the great feast. But John tells the story so that the religious leaders, on the morning Jesus is condemned, have not yet eaten the Passover. He calls that day the day of preparation, which places the death of Jesus a full day earlier in the calendar than the other three seem to place it. This is not a peripheral detail. This is not the number of women in a group. This is the dating of the single most important night in the entire story. And I want to be straight with you. The scholars who care most about the Bible's reliability, the ones who have spent their careers defending it, do not agree on how to solve this. Some argue that John is using the word Passover more broadly to mean the whole festival week. Some appeal to two different calendars running at once in first-century Judaism. These are serious proposals from serious people, but they do not converge. There is no single answer everyone stands behind. So here is where intellectual honesty has to do its real work. I am not going to tell you this one is fully resolved, because it is not. There is a genuine tension here, and pretending otherwise would make me exactly the kind of defender I warned you about at the start. But watch what that admission opens, rather than closes. Because notice what every account still agrees on. He died on a Friday. He died at Passover. He died as the lambs were being prepared. The thing that is unresolved is the precise day on the calendar. The thing that is rock solid is the meaning. And a faith that can hold an open question without panicking is a stronger faith than one that needs every question slammed shut. The honest believer does not say, there are no hard parts. The honest believer says, here is exactly where the hard part is, and here is why I am still standing. If this kind of honest digging is the sort of thing you want more of, this is the moment to subscribe. And if you are able, to become a member. That support is what lets us take the hard questions slowly instead of rushing past them. To everyone who already does, thank you. You are part of why this channel can afford to tell the truth about the difficult passages. Now let it escalate, because the next two cases take us from honest tension into something far more interesting. Authorial intention. Watch what John does with the temple. There is a famous, furious scene. Jesus walking into the temple courts, overturning the tables of the money changers, driving out the sellers, the whole sacred marketplace scattered across the stone. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all place that scene in the final week, days before the cross. It is one of the sparks that gets him killed. John places the very same kind of scene at the beginning. Right after the first miracle, water into wine, at the opening of the ministry, years earlier. Now you have a choice, and most people only know about the first option. Option 1. There were two cleansings, two separate furious afternoons. Some careful scholars defend this. Option 2. And this is the one nobody mentions from the pulpit. John knew exactly where this event happened in the timeline and moved it on purpose, placed it at the front like an overture, so that from the very first scene you understand what this man has come to confront. One respected scholar of John's Gospel puts it plainly. John relocated the account for theological reasons, fitting it into his larger picture of Jesus as the one who fulfills and replaces the old institutions. Read that slowly, because it gives you a third door. Not contradiction. Not desperate harmonization. Intention. The question stops being, did this happen at this exact time, and becomes, why did this author choose to put it here? And that is the question an ancient reader would have known to ask in the first place. Then there is Judas. And Judas is the cleanest laboratory specimen in this entire subject, because here you can watch all three ways of reading a difference, laid out side by side on one small, grim story. Matthew tells you Judas, sick with regret, threw the silver back at the priests, went out, and hanged himself. The priests took the blood money and bought a field. The book of Acts tells it differently. There, Judas himself acquires a field with the reward of his wickedness, and falls headlong, and his body bursts open on the ground. Who bought the field? How he died? Why the place got its terrible name? The two accounts pull apart on all three. Now watch the three readings. The skeptic reads it and says, flat contradiction, words mean what they say. This is a story that grew in the retelling. That reading is honest about the tension. The strict harmonizer reads it and says, no problem. Matthew gives the cause, and Acts gives the result. He hanged himself, and later the rope or the branch broke, and the body fell and burst. And here I have to be honest with you again, because this is the Dodge autopsy. That solution is possible, but neither text actually says the rope broke. That falling body is not in Matthew and it is not in Acts. It is a scenario someone built to make the seam disappear. It might even be right, but we should call it what it is, a construction, not a verse. And then there is the third reading, the literary one, and it is the most satisfying of the three. Matthew was a taxman. He thinks in money, and his account fixes on the financial fate of the blood silver. Luke, who wrote Acts, was by tradition a physician, and his account fixes on the body, the physical horror of it. Each man tells the part his own eyes were trained to see. Not two incompatible reports. Two witnesses, each leaning toward what he could not help noticing. Now we arrive at the turn. The thing that, once you see it, you cannot unsee. There was a writer in the ancient world named Plutarch. He wrote biographies of famous Greeks and Romans, and he is one of the most respected biographers antiquity produced. And here is the detail that detonates this whole debate. Plutarch sometimes told the very same story twice, in two of his own books, the same event, narrated by the same man, in the same career. And when he did, the two versions did not match. He would change a number, shift a name, compress two moments into one, move an episode earlier or later for effect, put a famous line in a different mouth. A scholar spent years doing nothing but laying Plutarch's repeated stories next to each other and cataloging exactly how they diverged. And when that same catalog of techniques was held up against the Gospels, the finding was striking. Only a small handful of gospel differences could not be explained by the very same devices that this trusted biographer used on himself. Let that land. A man nobody accuses of lying, telling the same true story two different ways, on purpose, because that is how the craft worked. The differences between the Gospels are not stranger than the differences inside a single ancient author's own work. They are the same texture, the same fingerprints of the same kind of writing. And notice what this does to the word contradiction itself. We have been throwing that word around as if it meant any difference at all. But a contradiction is a narrow, specific thing. It is one account saying a man stood alone in an empty room, and another saying the same room, in the same moment, was full. Both cannot be true. That is a contradiction. Almost nothing we have looked at today is that. We have been looking at compression, and spotlighting, and relocation, and paraphrase. Different tools, aimed at the same real event, by writers who assume their readers knew the difference. Take away the word contradiction, which was never the right word for most of this, and what is left on the table is not a pile of errors. It is a craft we simply forgot how to read. And now the reversal from the very beginning of this video pays off. Think about what it would mean if all four Gospels matched perfectly. Same words, same order, same numbers, same hour, no variation anywhere. You would not conclude that they were unusually reliable. A historian would conclude the opposite, that they had been combed and harmonized after the fact, that three of them copied the fourth, that somewhere along the line, someone smoothed the seams to remove exactly the kind of variation that real, independent witnesses always produce. The perfect agreement you instinctively wanted would have been the red flag. The messy agreement you were taught to fear is what authenticity actually looks like. The core, rock solid, across all four. The edges alive and slightly different in each. That is not the signature of a lie. It is the signature of the truth, told by more than one person who was actually there. And it goes one step further than that, into something genuinely beautiful. Some of these small differences do not just fail to contradict each other. They quietly fit together, the way two witnesses fill the gaps in each other's stories without meaning to. Here is one. In Luke's account of the empty tomb, the angel tells the women to remember how Jesus spoke to them while he was still in Galilee. And the text says they remembered. Which means, tucked into one incidental line, you learn that these particular women had been with Jesus back in Galilee long before. Another gospel does not spell that out in the same way, but the detail interlocks. It is the kind of offhand, unplanned dovetailing that historians look for as a mark of real, independent testimony. Not forgery. Forgery irons these things flat. This is the opposite of flat. So go back now and walk through everything we put on the table, and watch how it has changed in your hands. The angels at the tomb that would not synchronize. Now you see four people remembering the same impossible morning, the center fixed, the edges true to life. The two genealogies that did not match. Now you see two portraits, one shouting king, one shouting son of God, neither pretending to be a hospital chart. The Passover night that does not fully resolve. Now you see a believer who can name the hard part out loud and keep standing on the part that never moved. The temple scene John relocated. Now you see an author with a reason, not an author with a mistake. Judas, and his field, and his terrible death. Now you see two witnesses, the accountant and the physician, each telling the part his own eyes were built to see. And the perfect agreement you once wished for. Now you see it for what it would have been. The one thing that should have made you doubt. Maybe you are the person this whole video was really for. Maybe you grew up with these stories, and then one day, in a dorm room, or late at night with a screen glowing in the dark, someone laid the four accounts side by side and asked the question no one had ever taught you to ask. And the silence that followed scared you more than the question did. Because it felt like the people who raised you in this had either never looked, or had looked and never told you. Hear this clearly. You were not wrong to look. The looking was never the danger. Honesty is not the enemy of faith. The cheap version, the one that needs you to keep your eyes closed, was always the weaker thing. What you have now is sturdier than what you had before, because it has been into the hardest passages and walked back out. The differences are real. Some of them resolve cleanly, the moment you read the Gospels as what they are. A few of them, like that Passover night, stay genuinely open, and an honest faith can carry an open question without dropping everything else it holds. And not one of them is the crack you were afraid of. The thread you were not supposed to pull turns out to be stitched into something far stronger than you were told. And maybe that is the strangest gift in all of this. The very honesty you were afraid might cost you your faith is the thing that gives it a spine. You no longer have to look away from the hard pages. You get to walk straight into them and come back carrying more than you left with. If this changed how you see these accounts, subscribe and leave a comment. Even one word helps this reach someone who is sitting in that dorm room silence right now. Share it with the person you know who walked away over exactly this, thinking no one had an honest answer. And may you become the kind of person who is no longer afraid of the hard questions in the book you love. The kind who can look straight at the difficult places and find, waiting underneath them, not the absence of truth, but its fingerprints. God bless you.